Just Stop Oil continues its bold strategy of committing crimes to protect crime, as two of its members staged another protest. But I will be honest, at least this time there was no throwing of tomato soup at a historic painting. But don't celebrate just yet, because instead they chose a different form of vandalism by spray painting Charles Darwin's grave with the words 1.5 is dead in massive letters across it inside Westminster Abbey in London on January 13th. And just like the other supporters who have taken similar actions, these two of Just Stop Oil's oldest protesters, Alison Lee, 66, and D.I. Bly, 77, were immediately, you've guessed it, arrested, later released on bail, but are still facing serious charges, with the group confirming that the legal process against them is already in motion. To be honest, I have the same reaction now as I did when their group went after Van Gogh's painting. Like, what does a man who's been resting peacefully for nearly 140 years have something to do with climate change? And obviously, how is defacing his grave supposed to save the planet? I think these guys have been sniffing too much of their orange spray paint. The chemicals have clearly killed their brain cells. And honestly, since they started this group in 2022, this environmental activist group has carried out a series of extreme protests in which they've already wasted millions of taxpayers' money on police responses. And it looks like their goal is to make sure every single one of their members ends up with a criminal record, because getting arrested isn't just a risk they take. In fact, as they stated, it's actually part of their strategy, much like how Gandhi and his followers used civil disobedience to challenge the system. Except they are not just engaging in passive resistance, but are often resorting to vandalism and disruption, believing that overwhelming the legal system and filling up prisoners will force the government to somehow respond. This means we will be pressuring the state by exploiting its current weakest point: prison capacity. There is already an ongoing national debate around the logic of early release schemes, whilst the courts continue imprisoning peaceful people for demanding climate action. This is also an area of weakness for the government that will not last long as they hurry to complete building multiple new super prisons. But how does the public feel about this group? Exactly how you would think. Many people can't stand them anymore. They haven't been able to stand them for the longest time. Nobody is on their side. In fact, the University of Bristol did a study that found around 68% of participants had nothing but negative things to say about Just Stop Oil, with many feeling more annoyed than sympathetic towards their advocacy, as their actions keep making more people angry and not exactly winning them over. And with that in mind, moving on to their most recent and controversial protests, which, as a method, as mentioned earlier, it involved two women desecrating the resting place of one of history's most influential figures. This once again sparked outrage with backlash over how disrespectful their act was.
"2024 was the hottest year on record. We have already passed through the 1.5 degree. This is Darwin's grave. He would be turning in his grave if he knew that we were in the midst of the sixth great extinction."
But what exactly is the point of the 1.5 is dead? And more importantly, would Darwin be happy about having climate change graffiti on his gravestone being used as a prop for protests like this? Yeah, I don't think so. But just for the context, according to reports, the Copernicus Climate Change Service recently confirmed that in 2024 was the first year where global average temperatures officially crossed 1.5 above pre-industrial levels. So basically they were referring to the effects to keep global warming below that temperature. And if Darwin was smart enough to figure out the entire concept of evolution, then maybe he could also somehow solve this problem even after he's long gone. Which, as absurd as it sounds, only makes many even angrier at Just Stop Oil. Are we surprised? With some people saying stuff like this online. Oh dear. They are messing with things that are way beyond their comprehension. Fools. I think Just Stop Oil are the best argument against evolution. What did poor Darwin ever do to them? Prove they evolved from fish. He proved his theory by their actions. Total disrespect. I was always told never speak ill of the dead, nor defame a person's good name, whatever their cause, if they do not have the support of the public at large. And honestly, from what I've gathered, those involved in this are set to be back in court this March for another hearing. While some argue that Darwin, given his dedication to the natural world, might have supported environmental activism if he were alive today. The reality is that no one, regardless of their beliefs, would ever be okay with having a place meant to honor their life violated like this, even if, let's say, that the person had worked towards the same campaign, because it's just so unnecessary and completely out of line. Something we've kind of grown to expect with Just Stop Oil and their actions. And honestly, I'm not the only one talking about those who have made important contributions to science or society like him, but to literally anyone. Because no matter who is buried there, basic human decency says that the dead should be left in peace. But that's not all they've been up to, because onto another protest, they went for something even crazier, with a few of their members appearing in eerie costumes, surrounded by dense smoke from burning gas. Last time I checked, I don't think that was very environmentally friendly, guys. I have no idea what kind of aesthetic they were going for, but they looked like medical witches running around with what looked like chastity belts strapped to their heads. This is hilarious. Give them a whiff of smelling salt and rest assured they will snap out of it. I guess this is what unemployment looks like. Anyway, on a more serious note, it's kind of funny how their own rules don't really seem to apply to them, because they are literally demanding an end to oil and gas production, and they're also more often than not using materials that actually contain those very things in their demonstrations. And this is probably one of the biggest reasons why people aren't taking them very seriously, because, well, they're hypocrites. As you see, for a group so passionate about banning gas, well, they don't hold themselves to the same standards they expect from everyone else. They just always keep getting in the way by blocking streets to protest, stopping buses and cars from moving, which in turn leads to vehicles sitting idle in traffic, which, guess what, burns more fuel, releasing more pollution into the air. Good job, guys. To give you more of an idea of how far Just Stop Oil is taking their activism though, on January 29th, over 1,000 activists gathered outside the Royal Courts of Justice in London, blocking the road with a sit-in protest that lasted for hours. Why are these people not at work? This was held because 16 of their members were sentenced to prison, and appears they were being reviewed that day. As soon as they sat down, police surrounded them, warning that if they didn't move, they would be arrested. And after several attempts to get them to leave, well, they eventually did. Soon after, protesters occupied the Strand. They were surrounded by yellow-jacketed police officers who warned them if they did not move, a sentence 14 order would be imposed and they would be arrested. The Metropolitan Police said protesters left the road around 1:45 p.m. No arrests were made in relation to the sit-down in the road, as no serious disruption was caused, a spokesperson for the force said. And what's even more interesting is that if you look at their videos and articles on their website, they consistently try to frame these rallies as just harmless, peaceful demonstrations. I mean, yeah, they're not throwing punches or starting riots, and the idea of peaceful protests sounds good in theory, but it's just impossible to buy into that label when they've done so many things like block an ambulance, resulting in serious delays in getting someone to the hospital, and unfortunately this escalated to the point where that person died. Not exactly very peaceful. So that blue light policy they always mention, saying it lets emergency vehicles through, well, it's just pure bullshit. Because they actually put that into practice. They wouldn't have stopped their street action to save a single life. But clearly it doesn't work like they say it does. And their behavior has brought about a situation where life and death were at stake. The worst thing is, they never addressed the incident or even owned up to it, instead completely pretending like it just never happened. Okay, and look, this next bit is crazy because look, I mean, with how much they lecture everyone in the public about nature, I'm sure a lot of you would probably assume they're the most responsible when it comes to handling waste, property, and making eco-friendly choices. Obviously, right? Surely? But actually, what I'm about to show you proves otherwise.
So here we are in the heart of the beautiful Warwickshire countryside, and yet if I look through this hedge just here, there's rubbish dumped everywhere. You can see we've got sleeping bags, plastic bags full of rubbish, liners, more plastic bottles, plastic chairs, more plastic chairs. Absolute mess. And all this crap has been left here by the Just Stop Oil campaigners. We look here, you can see covered up here, concreted in one of the tunnels where they've been trying to dig underneath this main road here, right outside the Kingsbury Oil Terminal, and there's more concreted areas there where they've been filling in the holes. So what I want to know from somebody senior at Just Stop Oil, how is this acceptable? People dumping crap over our British countryside, polluting it, destroying the countryside and putting our wildlife at risk with rubbish. How can you justify this, and how can you tell me this is acceptable?
The guy in the video is actually the landowner, and for months, activists have been coming and going, blocking streets and even trying to dig tunnels under the road. But one morning, he discovered a huge pile of trash dumped in a hedgerow on his property, including plastic bottles, sleeping bags, plastic chairs, and just bags and bags full of garbage near a tunnel at the edge of his farm. It's insane. Some people had this to say on the video. This infuriates me, farmer myself, and I hate when garbage gets left or thrown out in my fields. This sort of crap makes my blood boil. I have people do the same thing on my land. I caught one once and told them softly that he can't do this and needs to remove it. He said, "There's nothing wrong with dumping rubbish. Nothing happens." I might be wrong, but it looks like these people don't even believe in what they claim to stand for. And I can't help but think that some of them probably just joined this movement to feel like they have a bigger purpose in life, or to be a part of something that makes them feel important. Either way, Just Stop Oil should be absolutely ashamed of themselves for being such massive hypocrites. Now, in this next one, on the same day as Just Stop Oil's biggest sit-in protest, 2 of their members were charged with aggravated trespass after they interrupted a performance of The Tempest at the Theatre Royal in Drury Lane on January 27th. They held a banner that said, "Over 1.5 degrees is a global shipwreck." The same message shouted by those older women who vandalized the Westminster Abbey. The actress on stage, Sigourney Weaver, was later escorted off, causing the show to be halted. But this isn't even the first time Just Stop Oil has done something like this, in a place where you wouldn't normally expect a protest. Because back in 23, 5 protesters from the same group barged into a performance of Les Marias, and not only did they appear, but they also locked themselves to the set using flexible bicycle locks, which the theatre technicians couldn't remove. And since there was no way to get them off quickly, this actually forced the play to stop, creating a huge inconvenience for everyone who had bought tickets. And according to the news, the theatre also lost around about £60,000 due to cancellations. And in the end, the protesters who engaged in this were later convicted of a similar offence. And it's not just theatre events they're targeting. They've also once defaced Stonehenge, covering the massive stones with orange powder. This happened right before the summer solstice, which is an important event where thousands of people attend to witness the shortest night and the longest day of the year. So for them to pick that exact moment to do this ended up pissing off not just the revelers, but also the government authorities. Honestly, at this point, I don't think anyone's even shocked anymore, because this group keeps ramping up their actions with more outrageous ways, and those responsible for this are facing the consequences as they've been charged with criminal damage. And from what I've read so far, though I don't know if anything has changed as I couldn't find any updates about the case, they could serve up to 2 years in prison for what they have done, similar to Phoebe. And look, I feel like a broken record when I say this, but I know everyone thinks the same thing too. Obviously, if you have something that you feel so deeply about and you want people to listen to you, this is simply not the way to go about it. This is why so many people hate them, and for the life of me, I do not understand how they don't get this yet. They're pushing more people away from their cause than making people want to even consider listening to them. People literally hate them, and they've done that to themselves. And just a day after that incident, by the way, they took their own protests to another part of Britain, where they sprayed the same orange paint all over Taylor Swift's private jet at Stansted Airport. Okay, no, that one I agree with. That makes sense. I think we might have been a little bit too harsh on these Just Stop Oil protests. They're actually, you know what, they sound all right, actually. I think I might have been a little bit harsh on them, but guys, I've changed my mind. They're not that bad, actually. Jokes aside, I mean, as if they hadn't already done enough. They also managed to attack Harrow Airport. What is wrong with these people? Seriously, I don't get how they were even allowed inside to begin with. Because even if you're not flying and you're just at the airport to pick someone up, you still have to go through security in some way, right? I mean, I guess they just jumped the fence or something. Like, if you're just waiting at arrivals, for example, there are guards everywhere, cameras watching, and rules about what you can and can't bring inside. So the fact that these protesters managed to walk in with fire extinguishers and pull this off without getting stopped right away, well, it's kind of wild. And if maybe anyone has any idea how they managed to pull this off, I'm kind of curious. Let me know in the comments. Look, I mean, think about it. If a regular person tried to walk there carrying the same stuff, they'd probably be handcuffed on the spot. Yet these guys just strolled into a crowded part with fire extinguishers, made a scene, and even had a cameraman recording everything without anyone stopping them at the entrance. And yeah, they didn't get near the planes or the runway, but they were still in a place where hundreds of travelers were, which should have been locked down better, in my opinion. And if one of those idiots looks kind of familiar, well, that's because one of them is Phoebe Plummer, the same girl who, along with another member, Anna Holland, threw tomato soup at a Van Gogh's painting, which caused massive outrage and eventually landed themselves in jail. And that's just how things go. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes, as they say. Because at such a young age, these two basically threw their futures away. We actually talked about them on our channel a few months back, so if you haven't seen that video, you might want to go check that out. You can click on the screen here, or there'll be a link in the description down below. But watch this video first. And look, I mean, I was reading through some of the comments earlier when we covered Just Stop Oil, and I can really see how everyone is already so done with this group. With some even saying, only 2 years in prison? They should have gotten at least 20. Glad she went to jail. She was extremely insufferable. We've got enough rich trust fund CEO brats to fill a planet. At this point, we just expect them to get arrested. That being said, even though they might get some support for their goal, the truth is that they've been receiving money for so long from Eileen Getty, who's tied to the Getty Oil Company, which kind of shows they aren't actually following the principles they want everyone else to live by. Again, making them hypocrites. Let's be honest, no one is believing that they don't drive their own cars, take taxis, buses, trains, planes. But look, at the same time, they're calling out oil companies while benefiting from someone who is deeply involved in that very industry. And look, the way that the public has responded to their protests pretty much says only one thing. Their approach is totally backfiring. The thing is, Just Stop Oil is mostly going after working class people who make up most of the world's population, thinking that going after big companies won't make much of a difference. So instead, they're messing with the daily lives of just regular individuals without realizing that they can't afford to have their time interrupted, because a lot of these activists likely don't have jobs, I think, like we've discovered in today's video, and obviously don't do the same amount of work as an average person, with some even being celebrities or coming from families with businesses, meaning they're not dealing with the same struggles as the everyday workers they're trying to get attention from.